Welcome to Mark Saunders in Brief. This video is intended to be a short clip and highlight reel of some of the key policy ideas that Mark Saunders is offering as mayoral candidate for the city of Toronto. This is cut from the longer form hour and 40-minute content, so if you'd like more deep dive and the other 5 candidates being covered, please go watch that video. Other than that, hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks. So we're going to focus on 3 key things. We're going to do an introduction of Mark Saunders, who he is, some of the key policy ideas that he has on offer, and then my own personal views of him as a mayoral candidate for Toronto. So Mark Saunders was the former Toronto Chief of Police from April 26, 2015 to July 31st, 2020. He was the former PC candidate to the Progressive Conservatives, aka under Premier Doug Ford, for Don Valley West in the most recent 2022 Ontario provincial elections. He was also named the province's special advisor to the Ontario Place redevelopment project, and he has held a 37-plus year career with the Toronto Police Services. So it's quite clear that he is politically inclined, and he clearly has an interest in the city, from policing all the way into politics. So here are some of the policy highlights and some of the key things that he is promising. As the former Toronto Chief of Police, clearly Mark Saunders is going to be interested in community safety. Some of the ideas that he's proposed on his platform is that he will meet with the Prime Minister and call for urgent reform to the bail system. He's going to push for the creation of reverse onus at bail hearings. The issue that I find with reverse onus is the idea that those with multiple firearm charges should be held until they present a good reason to be released. This is contrary to our current system and really the foundation of our justice system, which is, you presume innocence until proven guilty. This would create a special category that people are essentially presumed guilty until they can prove that they are innocent. I think that this will create some serious issues within the legal system, if not court challenges, if not potentially even constitutional challenges. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't speak on that specifically, but I'm not sure that this is realistic within the purview of the Mayor of Toronto, considering that criminal law is under federal jurisdiction as well. So I think this reads a lot as somebody who has experience as a police officer and is expressing some of their frustration at some of the issues within the bail system. But I'm not sure that he's speaking from a position of, of knowledge and expertise of the actual legal system and the potential issues that this will cause and the precedent that it'll set. What are the other special categories that this could expand into? What are the other people that'll suddenly fall into these groups? What if you get a speeding ticket? Are you now in the future would you potentially be held guilty until proven innocent? When does that end? And I'm not sure that's going to be successful, and I'm not sure that as the mayor of Toronto, that should be what he's focusing on in terms of community safety. Attempting to meet with the prime minister on the condition that somehow the prime minister and the entire legal system and then the bills see his way on how the bail system should work. I don't think this is a realistic idea. So the TTC safety plan, I think, is a fairly solid idea in terms of just increasing the number of special constables, making sure that there's a minimum lighting standard at streetcars and bus stops, installing higher quality camera feeds on all subways, working with local school boards to ensure that students are educated. Things like this are fairly within the purview of mayor, and the impact of which I'm sure will be useful in terms of having more special constables patrolling the station. This seems fairly actionable, and I think this can be integrated with other plans. So overall, this is perfectly fine. But I think just being a bit bolder would be useful within the purview of this plan. So the supervised injection sites are interesting because they're a fairly controversial topic within Toronto. And there's been federal talk about the usefulness of said supervised injection sites. But Mark Saunders proposes that he would turn the city's focus on street cleanliness, and essentially direct more resources to these areas if there's more, if it's not clean. The issue here is adopting a zero tolerance policy towards needle disposal outside of supervised injection sites. The issue here is that currently it's not legal to just dump needles outside. There's no You're not. It's not like you're currently allowed to do it. So by default, within the law, there is sort of a zero tolerance policy. But the issue is like, how is this going to actually be impacted? Will clinics now be held accountable for what their users do outside of the clinics? That opens up a whole can of worms regarding liability. Does it also mean that potentially needles are not allowed to leave the clinic? That probably already happens. How do we control needles outside of that context? I think there needs to be more focus about what does zero tolerance even mean, beyond just sounding good to people who are afraid of supervised injection sites. Introduce a color-coded syringe system. Will clinics be punished if they find their syringes outside of that system? And how prevalent is this problem really? And is this something that's worth looking into as the mayor of the city, or is this something we should just direct Toronto Public Health to take care of, and let the people within that take care of it? Is this something that really needs the mayoral attention at a citywide level? I think we just need more focus on um, the actual impact of this issue and whether this issue impacts the majority of residents and thus requires the mayor to take action. So the overdose strategy is also another interesting one. So I guess this builds on the supervised injection site idea. So he says he would focus more on treatment as a key priority for the city's response, as opposed to continuing to expand the facilitation of drug use, which is a very loaded statement. This suggests that supervised injection sites facilitate drug use, which I think is a very simplified understanding of the purpose of the injection sites. If you solely look at injection sites as a place where people inject drugs, then you might think that yes, these only facilitate drug use, but you're ignoring the fact that many of these people will continue to use drugs regardless. And the difference between these supervised injection sites and getting it from a street dealer or getting it from wherever, or getting it from a house, or just hanging out in like a den, is that at these supervised injection sites, they know that it'll be clean. They know they can speak to nurses for treatment options. They know that the stuff that they're getting won't allow them to overdose, things like that. The goal should be getting as many people off of heroin and meth and those kind of things, obviously. But the idea of just closing down supervised injection sites, or that supervised injection sites only facilitate drug use, I think is a simplified notion, and a complete misunderstanding of how these systems even work. Yes, you look at the second point is how to best lead drug users to treatment as opposed to continuing a cycle of addiction. That's kind of the purpose of the supervised injection sites as a whole. And potentially even expanding the use of the supervised injection sites in order to create more options within said sites. So when people access them, they're able to talk to a nurse and actually get treatment there and actually get rehabilitation right there. So I think labeling the facilitation of drug use is a bit is simplified, and I don't think that's fair. And I don't really understand what the overdose action plan here is beyond just what talking to the province, working closely with the province to identify, working with the feds and provincial government. So essentially, he as the mayor is really not going to do anything. It seems like he's just going to ask the province and the federal government to give more money for certain things, and then complain that the supervised injection sites are continuing to continue drug use, ignoring the fact that the alternative isn't that people won't do drugs. The alternative is that people just do drugs everywhere. Um, yes, I think this is simplified. This needs more context, and this needs more information. The Saunders traffic transit plan is not very good. So he says he's going to remove the lanes, bike lanes on University Avenue. Take a look at the bike lanes here. On the right, we've got an image of University Avenue. All the way to the far right, right beside these parked cars where the bike lane is, we can see that the parked cars take up far more space than these bike lanes are. And I'm not a scientist, but far as I understand, is bikes take up far less space than a singular car. Every additional person on a bike or on transit is an extra car that is off the road. And I think we're ignoring the fact that like you are the traffic. When you are driving, you contribute to said traffic. So allowing more people to have more useful transit options, such as biking, such as transit, will not only reduce traffic and congestion, but also improve the quality of life of people who are living around here, who won't have to smell the smog, and improve the walkability of neighborhoods and businesses, who will get a lot of walk-in customers. So this seems like to be a very car-focused transit plan. The goal of this transit plan seems to be to increase the convenience of car drivers rather than reducing overall congestion. So we have opening up King Street to all traffic. I'm not sure how that improves anything. One streetcar carries over 100 people. One vehicle at most we're seeing, could carry 4 to 7 people, I suppose, but nobody actually uses the car to its full extent. At most, it's usually just a singular driver occupying a lane of traffic in one huge car, or even like a singular pickup truck, things like that. And the last position is, establish an accessibility and disability rights group with disabilities can get around their own city. Um, the idea that bike lanes are useless because some people with disabilities can't use them is a bit of a silly argument. There's lots of people with disabilities who can't walk. We don't deprioritize sidewalks. There's lots of people with disabilities who can't drive. We don't somehow deprioritize driving. So I don't see how removing bike lane is somehow going to improve accessibility and disability. If anything, more cars and more emphasis on traffic and all these lanes would make the roads more dangerous and remove transit options for more people than it could somehow benefit. So yeah, I think this is overall short-sighted and a silly plan. So the housing promises that Mark Saunders proposes is, cutting the time for approval applications to 1 year, make the builders and city accountable to each other by introducing assessment performance measures. Again, how are you going to cut down the approval applications to 1 year? How is that going to be enforced? Needs more specifics. The accountability is another thing. So if a builder doesn't fulfill its obligations, does the city now sue the builder? Does the reverse happen? Can the builder now sue the city according to said performance measures? What are these even performance measures? The other issue here that we're seeing is, designating a city staff member to navigate an application to the city's process. Why is the process so complicated that we need to navigate? We need to designate a paid city staff member to navigate an application. Does city staff member get one application? Do they have a year to fulfill said application? Why don't we just simplify the applications? Why don't we just digitize them like he proposes in his fourth point to make them in a way that we can just automate a lot of these applications and process them? This seems to be like a weird mix of attempting to be modern, but there's like this weird traditionalist aspect of just having a designated person who navigates the application. It also does not seem like Mark Saunders understands how said city process works, and the inefficiency of using a singular staff member per application. Recall that Toronto has the most amount of cranes in North America, more than the next 10 cities combined. So this is inefficient. Are we going to have 152 staff members per, one per development to focus? That's silly. The other point is, working with the local union. Sure, that's perfectly fine. I'm just not sure what the mayor of Toronto is going to do to encourage that. Are there going to be incentives? Are there going to be tax benefits? Are we going to create a community program to encourage people to join skilled trades? If that is so, we need a plan for that. I don't understand by work with local union. What does that really mean? The other thing is permit 1 to 2 floors per rental or condo building, or up to 20 additional units where appropriate. So like, this plan is just to make buildings taller. Fine, but again, like, is this really the small scale stuff that the mayor should be handling, or can we just send this down to the city council? Can we just change an urban planning bill, and a bylaw so we can allow that, and the mayor can focus on more larger projects instead? So housing, taking the property tax off of affordable housing, press the federal government to waive the HST. Again, this is dependent on the federal government agreeing with Mark Saunders. More federal policies, a last mile program to top up funding for projects in need of loans. So now, as mayor of Toronto, he wants to implement federal policies. The fourth point, changing the definition of infrastructure. Again, how is the mayor of Toronto going to impact federal policy? Is he going to go on weekly meetings to Ottawa in order to impact federal policy as the elected mayor of Toronto? Why should the elected mayor of Toronto get to impact federal policy when he wasn't elected to impact federal policy? All of these things just is not within the purview of the mayor of Toronto. And again, this reads as someone who doesn't have very much political experience, and just is kind of airing a lot of his grievances and his personal frustration with how things work, rather than a nuanced take into how federal policy and the jurisdiction boundaries work. Pursue the Toronto community housing model, where the city land is provided to builders in return for including affordable and supportive housing, and the city gets a share of the profits from market unit sales. So city land is provided. Does that mean we give away the valuable city land that Toronto owns, that the people own, to private developers? Is that really going to be the solution? Why should developers get to own private land indefinitely and somehow the city will get a small cut from the profits? What is that deal? How does that deal even work? What does that mean? Is the Toronto community housing model even worth following? Is it even effective? Considering there is a Regent Park revitalization, if we're going to rebuild it all over again, why would developers spend the time and money to develop high quality housing? All these things need to be focused on. Incentivize opportunities to support underused commercial buildings, convert to shelters, supportive housing. Again, I don't know very much about the conditions that it would take for commercial building to be converted into residential, but I imagine there's quite a lot of regulations that prevent, a lot of office structures from suddenly being residential buildings or warehouses becoming shelters for supportive housing. But I think it's worth exploring. We need creative and bold ideas. I think this is worth looking into. I'm just a bit worried as to, the intense focus on federal policies as the mayor of Toronto may just lead to failure. Yeah, I don't think a lot of these ideas are very good. So I would say that overall, Mark Saunders has quite a few ideas that are outside of the purview of the mayor. It seems that he's really leaning into his police experience. So, his community safety, all the TTC safety stuff is really reliant on having more officers. And as a former police chief, some might say it's in his interest to just continue to increase the police budget. Um, I'm not sure, how true that is, but it seems like, he's really sticking to his narrow lane of policing experience, and anything else, it's kind of a jumble of understanding of how that actually works. Overall, I would say a lot of these priorities are extremely strange as the mayor of Toronto. Focusing on bike lanes in a small section of downtown, while at the same time trying to impact federal policies, while at the same time, leaning heavily on policing as a solution to the problems. I'm a bit worried that he is going to lean into the idea of more policing and at the same time, not really making much impact on housing and transit and everything else in order to, kind of blame the federal or the provincial government if he doesn't go his way. So yeah, I don't think that Mark Saunders would be a good candidate for mayor, nor do I think he would be an effective mayor that would consider transit, housing, and other options beyond just policing. And as I mentioned before, you need to concentrate less on bike lanes and more on housing. I don't really understand why bike lanes are taking up so much airtime in his policy. If anything, more bike lanes are better, but concentrate more on housing and transit and, key critical issues that impact the majority of people. There needs to be less dependency on federal and provincial jurisdiction. A lot of these ideas are contingent on the fact that the federal and provincial governments or provincial governments will agree with him, which is a lot asking for as the mayor of Toronto. So I think he needs to stick to things that are within the purview of the mayor. That aren't just that are not just hopes and dreams. He has questionable experience as an elected official. I don't think that police experience is the same as political or urban development experience. I'm a bit worried that his lack of experience in municipal council will impact the kinds of policies and the ideas that he will follow. And there is potential on some of his policies that he may just end up in certain lawsuits and certain issues just based on the fact that some of them I can already sense, certain advocacy rights groups may come after him for that. I think it's just a massive waste of time to focus on that and instead focus on things that are within the purview of the mayor of Toronto. Focus on things that impact Toronto residents directly: housing, transit, jobs. That's it. Like, you don't need to really start attempting to reform the criminal justice system. If that's your intention, become a judge. If that's your intention, become a lawyer. If that's your intention, go work in federal policy. This is the mayor of Toronto is not the position to be doing that. Again, I'm concerned that the solutions will boil down to, more police, and then the secondary stuff will be, the federal government or the provincial government then let me do things, so now my hands are tied, which I think would be a bit of a cop out in comparison to some of the other candidates we've seen that do have policies that are within the purview of mayor and can create real impact.